My sister wants to get married on the same day and place as me to save costs, but I save nothing on humiliating her, even when she wants to come on my honeymoon. Weddings are supposed to be happy moments, right? Well, for most people, yes. But if you come from a broken family like mine, it can get really complicated. I'm 31 and getting married in 2 months to the love of my life. We've been planning this day for over a year, and I was so excited because everything was coming together. I'm marrying a wonderful man, and my dad, who has always supported me, insisted on paying for most of the wedding. He wanted it to be a grand event in an elegant venue, something truly special. Everything was going well. But, as often happens in my life, my mom found a way to complicate everything. Here comes the complicated part. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old. It wasn't a difficult divorce legally, but it divided our lives in ways that no custody agreement could resolve. My mom remarried a year later and had my half-sister Bernie, who's 23, with her new husband. Even though my parents shared custody, I spent most of my time with my dad. My relationship with my mom cooled down after she remarried, and things got worse when Bernie became the center of her attention. I didn't feel resentful about it. It just became clear that my mom had moved on with her life and that I was a secondary priority. Fast forward to now, I've been dating my fiancé for over 5 years, and we think it's time to get married. I told my dad about our plan, and he was thrilled, immediately offering to help us financially. I also told my mom, and she seemed happy. But after a while, things started to get complicated. 3 weeks ago, out of the blue, I got a call from her. We didn't usually talk much, so the call itself was a surprise. I thought she wanted to catch up or ask about the wedding, maybe share in my excitement, but I was completely wrong. She started with an overly cheerful tone, which I've learned to recognize as a sign that something bad is coming. "Sweetie, I have good news. Guess what? Bernie got engaged." I was taken by surprise. I didn't even know Bernie was seriously dating anyone. We weren't close, so it wasn't surprising I didn't know, but the way my mom was saying it made it seem like this was something expected. I replied, "Oh, that's great, congratulations." But in the back of my mind, I was puzzled. Why was she calling specifically to tell me this? After all, I didn't care if she was single or engaged. Then she paused for a few seconds, lowered her tone and said, "Well, here's the thing. Bernie and her fiancé are on a very tight budget. They can't afford a big wedding like yours. So we thought, what if Bernie and her fiancé get married on the same day as you? We could use the same venue, just a few hours earlier, of course. Maybe Bernie could have a small ceremony in the morning, and then you could have yours in the afternoon. It would save us a lot of money, and it would be so special for you two to share that day." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mom was essentially asking me to share my wedding day, the one I had been planning for over a year with my half-sister, with whom I barely had a relationship. My mind couldn't process it. Without thinking twice, I replied, "No way. I'm not going to let her ruin my day. This is my wedding day, Mom. It's not a family reunion or a way to save money. I'm not going to share it with anyone, especially not with Bernie." "I'm sorry." Her cheerful tone faltered, but she insisted, "Bernie and her fiancé really can't afford something like yours. You have to understand how hard it is for us not to be able to give her what she deserves. It's just lending them the venue for a few hours. They would only use a corner of the large hall. It's not much to ask." She tried to reason with me, arguing that they were going through difficulties and that this would solve many of their problems. I told her, "I'm sorry, but the answer is no." She sighed deeply and changed the subject, but I knew the conversation wasn't over, not by a long shot. Over the following weeks, I was bombarded with calls and messages from my mom. She wouldn't give up. Every conversation was the same, her begging me to let Bernie have her wedding on the same day, and me responding with a resounding no. She started using every tactic possible, trying to manipulate me emotionally. First, she played the family card. "Wouldn't it be nice for you and Bernie to share such a special day? After all, she's your sister." I replied, "But we're not close, and I don't want to be. I accepted a long time ago that Bernie and I won't have a sibling bond, and that's fine with me." Then she got angry. "And whose fault is it that you aren't close? You're the older one. Did you ever try to get along with her?" "No, I didn't, and I don't want to," I replied. Next, she tried to make me feel guilty. "You and your dad have so much. Your wedding is going to be beautiful and expensive. Don't you think it's a little selfish to keep all that to yourself when your sister and her fiancé are struggling to organize theirs? She doesn't even have a full-time job, and her fiancé can't afford a fancy wedding. And your stepdad can't help either. We're going through tough times." I was fuming by this point, so I let her have it. First of all, I'm not responsible for their finances. If she wants to get married without a steady job, that's her problem. How are they going to manage afterward? If they can't afford a big wedding, let them have a small one. But it's not fair for you to ask me to share my special day. Since then, I stopped answering her calls and messages, even the ones where she tried to ask me about the wedding preparations. I feel mentally exhausted from all this. The truth is, I put a lot of effort into rebuilding my relationship with my mom. As I mentioned before, she was absent for most of my childhood, and part of me held resentment because she moved on with her life so quickly. A few years ago, I talked about this with my therapist. With her help, I decided to work on my relationship with her, which helped me grow as a person. With this new episode, I feel like we're back at square one. Now, I really don't know if I'm being selfish or simply setting my boundaries. My mom assures me that Bernie's wedding won't interfere with mine at all, and that it will be over before my guests arrive. Also, it will be a small ceremony for them, with fewer than 10 people. Update 1. Thank you for reaffirming my stance. You're right in saying it takes 2 people to mend a relationship, and my mother's priorities are quite clear. She doesn't care about my happiness. She's only interested in fulfilling her golden child's wishes. Some people asked why I'm so resentful toward my half-sister. What's the story behind this, and why does she want to get married in the same place as I do? Let me explain these things one by one. Well, I admit that I may have sounded bitter, or perhaps cold, toward Bernie. The reason, once again, has to do with childhood trauma. It pains me to share this, but my parents divorced because my mom was cheating on my dad with Bernie's father. I was only 5 years old, but some memories are etched clearly. I remember the day my dad left the house, and a few hours later, Bernie's dad arrived at our house, and my mom locked herself in her room with him. That night, I cried myself to sleep. I don't remember how many days passed before my dad came to see me. When he did, I told him I wanted to live with him. At that time, he was staying temporarily with my grandparents, and he took me with him. My mom didn't object. That was the one good thing she did for me. She used to visit me often and took me back to her house, but never by force. I loved my mom, and every time she asked me to go with her, I thought she would finally take care of me and love me like she used to. But that never happened. She was too busy being the perfect wife for her new husband, and soon she became pregnant with Bernie. I started spending more time living with my dad. I liked being with him and my grandparents. Shortly after, my dad got his own house, just a block away from my grandparents' house. Eventually, he remarried, but that wasn't until I was in high school. I get along very well with his wife. I lived with my grandparents full-time during high school, and by the time I went off to college, I had almost completely distanced myself from my mom. My dad paid for my studies and helped me start my professional career. I've always had a close relationship with him, while my relationship with my mom has been, to say the least, less than ideal. We text occasionally and see each other at family gatherings, but the emotional distance was clear. As for my resentment towards Bernie, well, I'm not sure how to explain it. Bernie and I never had a sibling bond. They always treated me like a stranger in that house, which originally was mine. That house holds memories of my childhood with my parents, but it was, in a sense, usurped by Bernie and her dad. Honestly, I never tried to get close to Bernie and kept my distance. I'm not sure whose fault it is, but that's how things are. Now, why does Bernie want to get married at the same place as me? I have no idea why on earth she thinks it's okay to ruin my wedding. I have no clue. However, Bernie has always been the kind of person who wants everything that others have. I remember every time she saw one of my new dresses, dolls, or other toys, she'd pester her parents to get her the same thing. Unfortunately, her dad didn't earn enough, so most of the time, she only got a cheaper version of what I had. Not that I want to sound arrogant, but that's just how things were. So maybe, after learning I was going to have my wedding at this beautiful lakeside mansion, she wanted the same for hers. But poor thing, she couldn't afford it, nor could her fiancé, or her dad, and that's why they sent my mom to carry out the mission. Now, the update. After I turned down my mother, she secretly tried to manipulate my fiancé. Yes, she had the audacity. She told him the same sad story about Bernie's finances, begging him to let her use our venue for her wedding as an act of kindness. She even asked if we could move our ceremony a little later, maybe in the afternoon, so Bernie could get married in the morning. She promised it would be small, just with close family, assuring him it wouldn't interfere with our wedding. My fiancé is an incredibly calm person. He listened, empathized with her, and told her he'd talk it over with me. I'm glad he knew his boundaries and didn't make the decision on his own. I was furious, but he calmed me down and said, "Look, it's your decision. This is your day, and if you don't want to share it, then we won't share it. I'll support whatever you decide." His words were exactly what I needed to hear. My mom had tried to involve my fiancé in her plan, but I wasn't going to allow it. I was done being nice. I immediately called my mom and scolded her for what she did. I made it very clear that if she didn't stop with her underhanded tactics, I would ban her from my wedding and cut her out of my life. She cried and apologized, saying it was a mistake to contact my fiancé. She also promised to behave better from now on. The problem is, I don't want her apology. I wanted her to say something horrible so I could uninvite her. After what she did, I don't want her at my wedding, but now that she's apologized, would I be the bad one if I still cut her off and banned her from my wedding despite her apology? Update 2. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received a desperate call from my aunt, who's usually the first to know about any family drama. Her first words were, "Have you seen Bernie's wedding invitation?" I was confused and replied, "No, I haven't received anything." Then she told me that Bernie had sent out invitations with the same date and location as my wedding, and people were already asking her if it was a joint ceremony. Previously, my mom had said Bernie's wedding would be small, with fewer than 10 people. But according to my aunt, the invitation had already been sent to more than 50 people, plus their plus ones, and they were all relatives and friends from our close circle. This meant that relatives from my mom's side, who were planning to attend my wedding, were now also invited to Bernie's. It was clear, Bernie wants to ruin my wedding by holding hers first. I went into panic mode. I mean, what the hell is going on? I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Bernie had sent invitations to get married on the same day, and at the same venue as mine, without any agreement with me. I was furious. I drove straight to my aunt's house, picked up a printed copy of the invitation, and went to my mom's house in a rage. I was so mad that I threw the invitation at her and said, "What is going on?" That was the trigger for my mother to burst into tears. My mom immediately got emotional and said, "I'm so sorry. Your stepfather and Bernie pressured me to convince you, but I couldn't get you to agree. I assured them I'd get you on board, and Bernie already sent out the invitations. I don't know what to do now." I couldn't believe the nerve of my mother. She had promised them I'd share my wedding day without even consulting me. I sat there in silence, trying to process how she could make such a big promise behind my back. And yet, she still wasn't done. She made one last desperate attempt. "Honey, now that the invitations have already been sent, could you consider it? Please, do it for me." I promised them this would happen. If the wedding gets canceled now, the groom's family and other relatives will humiliate us. I could feel my blood boiling. I replied, as coldly as I could, "I've told you time and time again that I'm not going to share my wedding day with Bernie. If they've already sent out invitations, that's their problem, not mine." My mom started crying even louder, but I didn't care anymore. I made it very clear to her that I was cutting her out of my life and that she, Bernie, and her whole family were banned from my wedding. I was tired of their games. That was 2 days ago, and since then, there's been total silence. All this drama has me on the edge. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, right? But here I am, dealing with this completely unnecessary chaos. Update 3. I'm married now. Thank you all so much for your support. After the last confrontation with my mom, I decided to involve my dad. I told him everything, and he assured me that he'd handle the situation. I also contacted the venue to inform them of what was happening. I made it very clear that Bernie, my mom, and her husband were strictly prohibited from even attempting to enter the wedding, let alone organizing any event there. The venue confirmed that nobody, other than my fiancé and I, could make any changes or bookings related to our wedding. The next few days were calm. I figured my mom and Bernie were busy trying to cancel the invitations and sort out the mess they'd created. But a few days later, my mom showed up at my house. She looked exhausted, with a tear-stained face as if she hadn't slept in days. As soon as I opened the door, she started yelling, "We're humiliated. Bernie had to cancel everything. People are asking why, and now we look like fools. Everyone knows we can't afford a decent wedding for Bernie. Have you humiliated us?" Bernie is so distraught she hasn't eaten in days. She and her father aren't even speaking to me. What did you gain by ruining my happiness? I crossed my arms and looked at her, feeling not a hint of sympathy. I told you from the beginning that I wasn't going to share my wedding day. You ignored me, went behind my back, and tried to force this. This is your fault, not mine. And yes, now you only have one daughter, Bernie, because I'm cutting you out of my life. I don't want to continue this toxic relationship. You and your family are not invited to my wedding either. Before she could respond, I closed the door in her face. It's not a moment I'm particularly proud of, and I felt bad about banning her from the wedding, but I needed to set that boundary. I told my dad everything, and he was fully supportive. He even offered to cover any extra security costs if necessary. He has always been my biggest support, and this time was no different. The fallout was swift and ugly. My mom even tried involving my aunt, hoping she would convince me to let her attend, but I stood firm. Despite all the drama, my wedding turned out perfect. I was surrounded by people who truly care about me. There was no stress or chaos, just love and happiness. My dad walked me down the aisle, and my husband and I exchanged our vows in front of our closest family and friends. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. My mom's absence didn't even cross my mind that day. It was her loss, not mine. I know some people might think I was too harsh or that I should have found a middle ground, but after years of coldness and indifference from my mom, I wasn't willing to sacrifice my happiness to please her or anyone else. Bernie's wedding had to be completely canceled. They sent out formal apology notes to the guests, citing unforeseen circumstances. I found out from my aunt that Bernie was devastated and furious with me. She blames me for everything, which, honestly, I expected. She's upset that her dream of getting married in such an exclusive venue was shattered. To her, it didn't matter that she overstepped by sending out invitations without my consent, or that they tried to pressure me into accepting something I clearly didn't want. In her view, I was the one who ruined everything. Apparently, Bernie has stopped speaking to anyone outside her closest circle. She's too embarrassed to face friends or extended family. The financial strain from canceling everything hit them hard too, as she and her fiancé were already tight on money. The losses from the non-refundable deposits took a big toll on them. My aunt mentioned that Bernie's been painting me as the villain in this whole story. In her version, I'm the selfish sister who refused to share despite having everything, while she barely had so little. But instead of respecting my boundaries, they tried to take advantage of me, and now they are facing the consequences. There is also talk that this disaster has affected the relationship between Bernie and her fiancé. From what I've heard, he was furious when everything blew up. Apparently, he never wanted to take advantage of my wedding from the start, but was pressured by Bernie into going along with it. He thought it was a bad idea from the beginning and felt ashamed when they had to cancel the wedding. My aunt hinted that things have been tense between them since. Although they haven't officially broken up, it's clear that all this drama has caused serious issues in their relationship. I'm glad Bernie's fiancé seems to be a sensible guy who understands it's wrong to try and take over someone else's special day. Update 4. I think I've already told you how Bernie was always the kind of girl who, whenever she saw someone had something, she wanted it too. So, this new update probably won't surprise you in the slightest. Recently, my mom found out that my husband and I were going on our honeymoon. Even though Bernie's wedding was completely canceled and, therefore, she won't be having a honeymoon, she wanted me to take her along on our trip to make up for all the supposed harm I caused by ruining her wedding. Yes, you read that right. Bernie, who barely has any relationship with me, thought the least I could do was invite her on my honeymoon. No joke. Obviously, my mom didn't contact me directly because she's completely blocked in every way possible: phone, social media, emails, everything. But my mom, without hesitation, decided to call my dad to convince him to persuade me. She, with all the nerve in the world, told him that the least I could do was take Bernie with me. According to my mom, this would be the fairest thing to do, as a kind of compensation for destroying her dream day and her relationship. My dad, who has been my biggest support throughout this madness, directly told her that what she was asking now was even more ridiculous than what she'd asked before. He made it clear he had no intention of convincing me to take Bernie on the honeymoon, and that the best thing my mom could do at this point was to stop making such absurd requests. He told her something I thought was spot on. If she truly wanted to have any kind of relationship with me in the future, she should start by treating me as her daughter and not as a resource for Bernie. He made it clear that this kind of behavior was only driving a deeper wedge between us. When my dad told me this, I couldn't help but laugh. The situation was so absurd that all I could do was take it with humor. Of course, I didn't give it any more thought because, obviously, I wasn't going to take Bernie on the honeymoon. It was a time for my husband and me, a moment we'd planned to enjoy as newlyweds. I wasn't going to include anyone else, especially not someone like Bernie. However, the story doesn't end there. Despite my dad being very clear with my mom, she decided to ignore his advice. So, on the day of our flight, my mom and Bernie showed up at the airport. Yes, they went to the airport. Fortunately, the airport is pretty big, and my husband and I spotted them before they saw us. So, in a quick move, we managed to sneak away without them noticing us. I'm sure they had no idea what our flight was or what time we were leaving. They must have been there waiting to ambush us, hoping we'd let them join our trip. And that's not all. Bernie even had a suitcase. She was completely prepared to board that plane with us. Now, ask yourself, if my mom and Bernie don't have much money, what were they thinking? Did they expect me to buy them last-minute plane tickets to join us on our honeymoon? That was yesterday. Today we're already at our destination, enjoying our honeymoon. And the only thing I hope is that my mom and Bernie had enough money to pay for the cab ride back from the airport, because the last thing I knew about them was that they were there waiting while our plane took off. Luckily, that's been all the contact we've had with them so far. My husband and I are enjoying our trip as it should be. Update 5. I've returned from our trip, and my husband and I were looking around the airport for my mom and sister. During our honeymoon, we had an ongoing joke, imagining that my mom and Bernie might have stayed to live at the airport, like in the movie. patiently waiting to ambush us when we returned to take advantage of the chance to ride home with us in a cab. All, of course, to make up for everything we'd supposedly done to them. But no, thankfully, they weren't there. Not that we expected them to be, but it made me laugh. Update 6. Want to know the latest thing Bernie has tried with me? Well, not directly with me, but it's something that could clearly affect me. She tried to flirt with my husband. Yes, because Bernie always wants what others have, and this time she didn't just want any husband. She wanted my husband. Somehow, she got his number. I have no idea how, but she did. She's obviously blocked on my husband's phone now, but not before receiving a response from me. First, she sent him several messages, trying to seduce him. They were along the lines of, well, if you ever get tired of her, you could always have a younger version. Or, I get the impression that she might be a bit boring in bed, something that doesn't happen to me. To top it off, she attached a couple of photos, which, although not completely nude, were quite suggestive. Of course, my husband didn't respond to any of those messages, but I did. My reply was direct. Hello Bernie, it's your sister. Your plan didn't work, but I think I know where you went wrong. The photos were a little ugly. Next time you try to seduce another woman's husband, especially your sister's, at least spend a few months at the gym, because you're a little overweight. I know I was cruel with my response, and I understand that mocking someone's weight isn't right. I'm not proud of resorting to that, but this woman has brought out the worst in me. I felt hurt and betrayed by what she was trying to do, and for a moment, I just let the anger speak. I'm sure some people will call me the bad one for this, and I accept that, but I won't deny that it felt good to do it at that moment. Bernie has crossed lines I never thought would be crossed, and this is just another proof of how damaging and manipulative she can be. Although I somewhat regret being so harsh in my response, I also think sometimes you need to hit back.